Almost 90 years ago, by an act of Congress, President Woodrow Wilson proclaimed the second Sunday in May as Mother's Day. He established the day as a time for public expression of our love and reverence for the mothers of our country. It's certainly true that no nation is ever greater than its mothers, for they are the makers of the next generation. And there's a lot to be said about mothers and any special holiday. There'll always be people offended and hurt on special days, you know. Even Christmas. Some people are hurt and offended at Christmas because they don't have families, or because they didn't have money to buy a child a gift, or to receive a gift, or whatever. And I find that Mother's Day is no different. Although it's a real blessing for some, I find that for the most part, women are not appreciated as mothers. They have no idea what goes on with a mother and all they go through, the pain to bring you into this world, the pain to continue with. Many that are single mothers have to do the work of a mother and father, to raise, to correct, to do everything till the point of exhaustion. I think there should be. President Wilson was right in at least asking us to stop one day out of the year to celebrate and remember mothers. Another reason why Mother's Day can hurt or be offensive to many is because they were rejected by their mother, or they were thrown off as not wanted. But God always, for His own children, has provided, all through history, He has provided surrogate mothers, true mothers, and fathers that would adopt and love and give a child what they were meant to have. You know, as far as God was concerned, He always wanted it to be a marriage between a man and a woman, have children, keep the children, stay together. God never planned divorce. God's idea was never for division, for breaking up a family, because He sees the hurt and pain that it brings everybody. So let's not forget that while you're celebrating, there are people that would love to be a mother and didn't get to be. Either because nobody wanted them and they couldn't get married, or because they didn't want anybody because they weren't good enough, they wanted something decent. Or because they were married and they were barren and tried everything there is in life to try. So all I'm saying is, let us be sensitive on days like this one. Because although it is a big celebration, thank God that for us, we're within the realm of not too tragic. But there's a lot of tragic stuff that happens in the world. And so we have to be sensitive to people who may not be all that willing to celebrate it like we would. On the other hand, I think that if we are teachers in schools, we ought to do all that we can to instill in the next generation that sense of being grateful to a mother, at least on Mother's Day, and do something for them. Because I think it's a good thing. I think President Wilson had a good idea. It wasn't a God idea, it was a good idea. And when I say it wasn't a God idea, what I mean is that it's not in the Bible. It's not one of the feasts of Israel that God, ordained. Because it wasn't a God thing. It's not something that celebrates Him. It's something that celebrates us. We all seem to know what you're supposed to do as a mother until you become one. The words come to me of a mother that was walking out of a college and said to her friend, I remember before I was married that I had 3 theories about raising children. Now I have 3 children and I've lost all my theories. Some mothers can take care of and have up to 10 children, but 10 children can't seem to take care of one mother. The truth of the matter is, it's not a spiritual celebration, but it's a real healing celebration. It's a good celebration. We're celebrating you and the patient that you've had when a kid asks you 1,000 times the same question, and you have to answer it that same 1,000 times. We need to remember all the things our mothers did for us. So the appreciation, I believe, is truly good in our life. And talking about memory, I'd like to take us down memory lane with a woman with a mother called Hannah. Hannah was in the Old Testament, and she was in a predicament. She lived in a time where there was no leadership and there was chaos, where there wasn't any true leadership. And everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And it was chaos everywhere. There wasn't really God leaders, there wasn't man leaders, there wasn't anything. And I'll read something to you here. In our English Bibles, the book of Ruth comes after Judges. But in the Hebrew Bible, 1 Samuel follows immediately after Judges. The situation is bleak. The nation of Israel is torn apart by the lack of leadership, and a pervasive spirit ruled the land. According to Judges 21:25, in those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit in their own eyes. The nation of Israel was often oppressed by the surrounding nations during those times. God would appoint a judge to lead his people, but their freedom generally lasted only as long as the judge was alive. On top of that, many of the judges, like Samson, had some fatal flaws. When we come to 1 Samuel, we're introduced to Hannah, who is the mother of the prophet who God desired to have, and who he would designate as the one who would bring Israel back from the time of chaos, destruction, and ruin to a time of godliness. So this is the backdrop to when Hannah comes on the scene. You know, one of the things that I would like to bring out is defining the traits of a worshiping woman. Because here's this woman that sets a tremendous example for all of us. And one of the things is that I'd like to see in 1 Samuel is several of the traits of a worshiping woman. Worshiping intercessors full of faith and are not exempted of having real problems. Let me give you the backdrop to this. We look at successful people. We look at how God answered her prayer. We look at how her son became a real man of God and a leader in Israel and anointed kings and subdued kingdoms and brought down nations. I mean, he was a tremendous man of God. We wouldn't think he was the type of man of God that, because he had hair going down almost to the ground, because his mother had made a promise, a Nazirite promise, that he would never shave his hair. So imagine by the time he was older how his hair looked, down to the ground, and his beard probably out to about here. You know, he didn't look like the standard man of God, but I'm telling you, and that he couldn't drink wine or touch any strong food or approach dead people. They had a Nazirite vow that they made to God, and most of those men walked in tremendous power with God. Here's this man. And let me give you the backdrop. When this woman, because we look at all the successes, but let's look what this woman went through, because sometimes we think that successful mothers, successful people that do it right, is because they had everything going for them and everything went right for them. Let me bring the reality to you. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, we're introduced to a man named Elkanah. That was her husband. Verse 2 tells us that he had 2 wives. Okay, that's a problem right there. First of all, God never ordered that. Why did he have 2 wives? Ask yourself the question, why did he have a wife on the side? Simple. Very likely he married Hannah first. She couldn't have children. And it was extremely important in their days, especially in their days, and even in ours, that we give offspring to our husbands as wives. She did not. She was a shame. She was a scourge to her time. People looked down on her. She was seen as somebody that was basically hated by God, because in those days they believed that it was God who said, and he did in his word, that he withholds the womb from bearing. This woman had every opportunity to get bitter with God and angry with God because of things happening in her life. Because we have a way of thinking that worshiping intercessors and people that love God and worship God and praise God is because everything's going right in their life. And then suddenly, to introduce her to us, she is introduced as a second wife to a woman who had children. Now remember, in Sarah's day, the type of scoffing and scourge that she went through by Hagar, who had a child by her husband when she could not, and the disdain that she went through. Now this is Hannah. Hannah was a beautiful mother. Beautiful mother because she had a heart for God. But the story begins with someone who had two wives, Peninnah and Hannah. The wife's chief role in those days was to provide children. A barren womb was considered a curse, and Hannah would have to be looked down upon. No doubt she was spiritually disturbed, socially disgraced, and emotionally depressed. She joins a long line of other women in the Bible, women of faith, women who battled their barrenness, like Sarah, Abraham's wife, Rebekah, Isaac's wife, Rachel, Jacob's wife. Doesn't it seem strange to you that when God decided that He wanted a family on earth, He starts with people that are barren and that can't produce it in themselves and have to come to God for this? In some cases, God gives children to people who couldn't have their own. And those children are the ones that God wanted to bring them under the covering that He had for them. God does such unusual things. But here's this woman, Ruth, Boaz's wife, Elizabeth, John the Baptist's mother, and the list goes on, of women who in their own could not come into the fulfillment of their life and become a mother, and had to engage the Lord. There had to be supernatural engagement of God in the midst of this. First thing I'd like to notice about Hannah is that she was a worshiper. In verse 3, it shows us that Elkanah and his two wives made a yearly visit to Shiloh. It was about a 20-mile journey, but they went to worship the Lord. This shows us something about their devout spirituality. When the whole culture was headed south spiritually, Elkanah forced his way against the current of apathy and took his family to the house of the Lord to worship there. Now that amazes me. There always are people that against the current of the land go for the real. They go for God. They are worshipers. They're going to worship regardless of what happens. But the one that stands out to me the most, you know which one it is Hannah. Because whether the rest of them went, the guy went there with his wife that had children. He's cool. The wife, she has everything. Provision from her husband, everything. Everything's cool. And so they worship the Lord. But here in that successful group was this woman who was suffering despise, who had a heart that was heavy, was wrestling with depression and torments of mind, wanted to know why God had separated her, marginalized her to suffer this way. Now, her worship is not the same as theirs, because hers is sacrificial. Hers now has to come out of a bleeding heart. Hers has to come out of a broken heart. And there's nothing that pleases God more than hearing the worship come out of a broken heart and a broken spirit. In fact, for years in Peniel, my father and I used to teach that brokenness is the main ingredient to true worship. And here's a woman that's showing us that place of brokenness. You say, well, I can't worship God. I'm sorry, I just don't want to play music. I don't want to worship God. I don't want to enter into that realm because I have every reason not to. Really? Really? That's why I call her worshiping intercessor. Why? Because out of her pain and bleeding, she worshiped the Lord. She came every year to face the person she should have been angry with, bitter against, and resentful toward. That's God, the Lord, who had closed her womb for no reason at all. Why didn't He like her? And her worship came out of brokenness. But not only did worship come out of brokenness, intercession came out of brokenness. Because she interceded with God and made a deal with Him that if He would give her a child, she would do something against the very nature of a mother that would rip out the heart of a mother. She would raise it and have it and hold it only as long as it was needing to suckle on her breast. And after that, she would give him to the Lord. You know, it's easy for us today because we bring them to church for 5 minutes, the pastor prays for them, we give them to the Lord, then we take them back and we have them, and we complain to the Lord that they're such a mess or that they're giving us a problem or whatever. We forget that when we give them to the Lord, He really belongs, or they really belong to Him. She said, I will do something contrary to my very nature. Let me tell you something about the nature of Elkanah. Do you remember that the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, they were a mess? Do you know how many people quit going to church because the pastor's a mess? Look at the testimony he gave us of a man who refuses to forgive the pastor and probably doesn't even want to go to church. Here's a man who went and worshiped in spite of it. Here's a man who went and did what he had to do in spite of it. Here is a man who, in spite of the fact he didn't like what they were doing because they were being very evil and very wicked, he could have said, no, I'm not going to worship at Shiloh anymore because I just don't like the ministers anyway. Even if no one else did his duty, he was going to do it. And that's the right attitude to have. She was not bitter against God. The most difficult thing Hannah ever faced is that the Lord had closed her womb. This phase is repeated twice. Once at the end of verse 5 and again at the beginning of verse 6. Twice it says the Lord closed her womb. The problem that she was having came from who? It came from the Lord. This was one of the hardest lessons that we will ever learn. Our problems are given to us by the Lord Himself. He is God who is behind the circumstances of life. We'd rather blame it on Satan or on somebody else, but it is God who allows good things and bad things to come to our lives. That's why in Job 2:10 it says, shall we accept good from God and not trouble or evil? In Ecclesiastes 7:14 it puts it so well. It says, in times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider God has made the one as well as the other. God is behind things. But worshipful intercessors revert to prayer. Look at verses 10 and 11. In the bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord, saying, O Lord Almighty. In other words, God, I know you can do all things. If you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. I just want to stop here for a minute. And I like her language. I'll tell you why. Because not only was she willing to worship the Lord in spite of the fact that she knew He had caused the problem, not only had she wrestled against bitterness and resentment and all the things that the enemy wants to fill our mind with and refused to accept that and worshipped and loved on Him in her brokenness, but she was willing to continue serving Him in spite of it. Because she said, be merciful to your servant. I'm here to still serve you. I'm not going to quit serving you just because things went wrong in my life. I'm not going to quit serving you because you've made a difference with me and shown me off against somebody else, and you bless them and you leave me without blessing. I will serve you in spite of it. To me, this woman is to be honored today as one of the best mothers ever lived on earth. Not because of what she produced, but because of who she was. And I think that could be said of many mothers today. Her weeping led to her worship, and her tears mingled with her prayers. A Nazarite was bound by a vow to be set apart to the Lord's service, and had to abstain from the fruit of the vine, was forbidden to cut their hair, and was not allowed to get near a dead body. Hannah realized a very important truth. Children are not just for parents, they're for the Lord. They're on a loan to us. It's our job to parent, to shepherd, and to train them for the Lord's work and for Him. You know, she just didn't say she was going to give him back to the Lord. Hannah was more than a mother to Samuel. She was asking God for Him to open her womb and not just give her a child for herself. She said, give me a child for the nation, to save this nation. Her intercession before God was to ask for a special child who would be used by Him to turn a nation around from the sense of depravity into the realm of liberation. So worshiping women experience God's answers to prayer as well. Out of your brokenness, you're going to see answers to your prayer. God honors. God honors. He doesn't honor bitterness. He doesn't honor resentment. He doesn't honor blaming, but He honors broken worship. That's what worship really is. It can only come out of brokenness. That's why the woman that came to Jesus had to break the alabaster box before the perfume could be released. We experience a lot of brokenness in our life. It's perhaps the greatest gift God could bring you. It's not a bad thing. If you use it right, if you let the vessel that holds the content break, in that brokenness, you'll find the perfume. In verse 19, it tells us that once again they got up very early the next morning and worshiped before the Lord. She didn't have her answer yet. She didn't only worship in her brokenness to ask the Lord, but she didn't get an answer at that moment. And before they left, she worshiped Him again. This woman is an amazing woman. To be honest with you, all hats off. She's an example to the whole world. This was their practice, not something they did just once in a while. They did it even when they went back home. A short time later, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son, naming him Samuel. His name sounds like the Hebrew for heard of God. Every time that she mentioned his name as a little baby, or even as an adult, she was reminded that God answers the cry of worshipers. God answers Hannah's prayer, but not just so she could have a baby, but God, not Hannah only asking for her nation, but now God needing a special prophet that He could work through. And so God allowed this time of barrenness so that the earth and heaven could be united on the same note. Listen to this. Jesus said that every prayer that we prayed according to the will of God would be answered. Her prayer for a child to bring the nation back to God suddenly rang a bell with God, who was looking for a special person to change the nation that had gone so far from Him. And when the two things got together, wham, it happened. When God's will and her will united in brokenness and in worship, it happened. I find one of the most amazing principles involved here ever. Amazing. Truly amazing. Worshipping women excel at keeping their promises. It would have been easy once she had the baby to change her mind, you know. This little sweet thing tucked up to her, looking up and cooing at Mommy, to put him on an altar to never see him again. All hats off to this woman. Hannah dedicated herself to her child, nursing and nurturing him, knowing that when he was able to eat on his own, she would take him and present him before the Lord, and that he would be there away from her for the rest of his days. Many people make promises to God only to forget them once time passes. Not so with Hannah. Hannah brings Samuel to the house of the Lord and says in verse 28 of 1 Samuel 1, "Now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." And in the second chapter of 1 Samuel, verse 19, it gives us these words. "Each year his mother made him a little robe and took it to him when she went up with her husband to offer her annual sacrifice and worship." You know what I get out of this? She didn't just worship in her brokenness, which is hard enough to do. She didn't quit worshiping after she got the answer. After she got what she wanted out of God, she didn't quit worshiping. Because worshiping is a way of life with those who love the Lord, regardless of what comes down. In verse 28 ends with a glimpse into young Samuel's heart. Now this to me was just superb. Remember now, he could have been what, about 3 years old? But he'd learned something from his mother by what he observed. Every year she came and worshiped. Now notice this. And he, Samuel, worshiped the Lord with them. 3 years old? And he worshiped the Lord? I thought worship needed brokenness. How about the kid whose mother gave him up and walked away from him and put in the hands of some old goat that wasn't even living right with God? And 2 brothers that treated him like hell and were the most wicked people on the face of the earth. Do you think he didn't have brokenness in his life? Do you know what he did with it? He didn't get bitter. He didn't get sour. He didn't open up to resentment. He had learned something from his mother. He had learned to love the God of Israel regardless, and to worship him because he had the only ingredient you really need for true worship, and that's brokenness. Do you think a 3-year-old didn't wake up at night saying, "Mommy, Mommy, where are you? Why did you abandon me? Why did you put me out?" Do you think he had this great call of God on his life? I think the Lord showed up at night to talk to him, just to comfort him. Listen, I was 15 years old when my parents put me on a plane and sent me to another country. That was really hard on me because although I'd matured a lot mentally because I was asked to study a lot and all the rest, I wasn't emotionally all that developed. I went to a place where they didn't care about my parents. They didn't know who they were. I was just another kid among many others. I was 15 years old when I went to another nation, and when I went to Bible school, you'd say, well, this shouldn't happen to a grown person. But I cried myself to sleep the first 6 months. All the guys in the dorm, they were snoring or whatever, some weren't. They were all asleep or talking or carrying on. I had my face toward the wall, and my pillow was wet every night. I couldn't understand why at 14 I didn't have parents. Why I was out there all alone. Surrounded by people, but I felt like I was alone. I felt like I didn't have anybody that knew me or cared a nickel about me. I got over it. I soon enough grew into a man. It's like sending a kid to an army, After boot camp, you grow into a man. But don't think there's not brokenness there. You can cry for dad, you can cry for mom. There's a lot of people around the world crying. But I found throughout life that when people want to know what your secret is of why you can worship God so well, it's the brokenness in your life. People want to know, they want a David to show them how to play to where that kind of anointing for precious worship can come and where God will come down and kiss it. I'll tell you what the secret is, something they don't have and can't get. It's the brokenness that comes behind it. Every note. You see, sometimes we have this vision or picture of how things should be, and in God they just, can I use the word ain't? They just aren't. It doesn't happen that way. Brokenness is beautiful to God. But you know why it can say of little tiny Samuel that he worshiped the Lord? Because there's plenty of brokenness. In his empty nights. In the empty arms he needed to feel around him when he was a child. In the mommy reassuring him continuously, and the dad reassuring him continuously, and being there and teaching them and showing him. He had nobody. Except this guy that couldn't care about him, and he was a nuisance to him. Because somebody just dropped the kid on his lap and now he had to deal with it. The only dad he ever saw growing up was one that came once a year, gave him a hug and left. What kind of a dad is that? He didn't understand the ways of God at first. Please, let's be real. If it could say here that he worshipped is because he had a boatload of brokenness. And people say, why do you need brokenness? Brokenness is not a bad thing. What's a bad thing? If you stay broke. But if you worship with it, it brings healing. It brings total healing. Until God finally restored it. Listen, instead of becoming a broken man, he became a general. Instead of being a broken man, he was the one commanding kings what they could do and what they shouldn't do. He was the one commanding armies. He was the one dictating the end of a kingdom by someone's disobedience like Saul. Don't think that because he was broken he was useless. Don't think that because he was broken he took it out on everybody. No, he was a healed man. He didn't let what had happened in his youth determine his future. He became one of the best judges Israel ever knew in all of its history until King David came on board. I know I'm bringing things out too much and I'm taking too long and I can quit this, but sometimes we'll read these words and he worshiped the Lord there and it's just like, okay, he worshiped the... No, I'm just giving you a little bit of backdrop so that you can appreciate why this little kid worships the Lord. I like that attitude. Hannah, no doubt, had exhorted him the first 3 years of his life out of Deuteronomy 6:6. That the commandments that I give you today that are upon your heart, impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Be sure to communicate that to your next generation. One of the things that I find that was very hard for Hannah to do was to sacrifice her life. What kind of a life is it to not have a child all your life, and when God finally gives you one, you have to live without him and watch him from a distance and just take a coat to him once a year? She had to give up her right to mother. Not just to be one, but to mother. I want to give you an example that will bring this out in a way that's tragic. But there's a true story that happened during the Holocaust. Solomon Rosenberg, his wife, and their 2 sons were arrested and placed in concentration camps for being Jews. The rules were simple. As long as they could all work, they were permitted to live. When they became too weak to work, they would be exterminated. Rosenberg watched as his own father and mother were marched off to their death, and he knew that his youngest son David would be next because he had always been a very frail child. Every evening Rosenberg came back from hard labor into the barracks, And after his hours of hard work, the first thing he did is he walked through the doors, searched all the faces of his family. And when he found them, he would huddle together, embrace all of them, and thank God that for one more day they were all alive. One day, he came back and didn't see. This is what he writes later. One day he came back and didn't see those familiar faces. He finally discovered his oldest son, Joshua, in a corner, sobbing and praying. "Josh," he said, "tell me it's not true." Joshua turned to his dad and said, "It's true. Today, David was not strong enough to do his work, so they took him away." Mr. Rosenberg then asked, "But where is your mother?" Joshua could barely speak and finally uttered, "When they came for David, he was so afraid that he cried out to his mom, and she walked him out by the hand to his death and hers." That is the kind of love that Hannah had for Samuel. She was willing to sacrifice her own happiness for the sake of her son. You would have thought that because she had so much to give up, that she would have just been a broken worshiper. But listen to this. Women of faith and worship also praise God in very trying moments. In 2 Samuel 1 through 11, we find something very beautiful. Hannah's beautiful psalm of praise incorporates no element of sadness at all. She has just dropped off Samuel at the temple, and now she breaks out into praise instead of weeping. She was thrilled to be able to give to the Lord the fulfillment of her dreams and his. Listen to her praise in verses 1 and 2. "My heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord my horn is lifted up. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I will delight in your deliverance. For here is your deliverance, O Lord. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God." Personally, I didn't think that was the best time to praise. Humanly speaking, this woman's either detached from reality or she has something that the rest of us need to have. She was in real touch with reality. She was in touch with her God. Because for some of us, our children are mine. To this woman, who to me, hats off, as one of the best mothers in the world. For the many things we've seen and the many we haven't yet observed. Just an example of so many other beautiful women in the world. Even my mother. Let me give you some closing thoughts really quickly. Women, you are of great worth in God's sight, whether or not you have a child. Mother, make it your mission to give your children to the Lord for a lifetime of dedicated service. And finally, one of the lessons from the life of Hannah is that each of us needs to be growing in our relationship with God regardless of our circumstances. And Father, today I praise and thank you for this word to all of us. May it be a challenge to some, may it be a blessing to others, may it be an encouragement to all of us. Let us take courage from this woman who was such a treasure, and let us quit despising broken people. Let us support them. Thank you for a husband that supported her. For the scriptures, Lord, are very clear to say that at the time of sacrifice, the priest would give a portion to the families. And Elkanah gave the largest, the super portion, which normally was given to the special person in the family, to Hannah every time they went to the altar for worship. I thank you, Lord, that even Elkanah, having another wife who made him successful at first, recognized the one who had the virtues from heaven and brought to her the larger of the portions of the meal, to honor her before all her family. Honored her not only because of the suffering she went to in being barren and not being bitter, but honoring her because of her power in worship and in intercession. Honoring her for being able to give up her right after having her child pressed to her breasts, and giving him up to the Lord, and walking away from a prized possession in a sacrificial manner. Honoring her because of her sacrificial praise, because many of us can praise when everything goes right, but when you're giving away the object of your love, praise explodes in this heart. Honoring her because he didn't have to live with a bitter woman. Honoring her because he was a man of integrity. Father, I just want to honor her today. Together with Elkanah, her husband, we all want to honor her as someone who leaves us and has left us a vital example to follow as children and as parents. Give us the same stuff she was made of. We honor you, Hannah. And when we get to heaven, we will honor you there. And we thank you for the examples in life you give us. We thank you for those children who were great in the eyes of the Lord and a blessing to men on earth. And today, Father, I just ask that none of us would continue fighting with our brokenness. But whether our brokenness comes in because of health, or our brokenness comes in because of pain, or our brokenness comes in because of some disease, or our brokenness comes in because of our barrenness, that we might find the answers on Mother's Day that this woman found before the Lord that day. And I ask you, Father, to bless each mother today and those that aren't and wish to be. And may we all join in hearts of praise, because definitely you are worth it.